Okay.
Definitely.
Yes. So, I was looking at the different topics which are being covered, and also, I some of my students are also there. So I asked them that what are the topics that are being covered. Then I realized that I need to, cover some of the topics which are less likely to be covered. So I thought of, focusing more on water and carbon cycle, which is probably one of the very important topic and which has gained a lot of interest among the researchers. But it is less likely that it will be covered. So it has more related to vegetation, water, and so on, and more related to carbon cycle. So I decided to cover this part in the first half, and second half we'll be covering more on the works related to the ways in which we can use shorter scale weather forecast and extended range predictions for agricultural and flood applications. So this is what I thought of finally structuring my talk. And yeah, so I'll start with one of the very known figures. So I'll minimize this. Okay. This talks about carbon cycle and water cycle. So now when you're talking about carbon cycle, since we are emitting carbon dioxide and there are a lot of things which are going on all around the globe. So every year this carbon cycle estimates, that means how much we are emitting and how much we are taking or absorbing. This part is not very clear, and every year it needs an update. So what is happening now, every year we see an update that is coming, which is the estimates on global carbon cycle, and there are changes which are happening from year to year, which is important, and also it gives us a lot of ideas that what exactly we are now and how much carbon dioxide we are emitting, how much excess carbon dioxide we have. Now, the other important cycle is water cycle. We are aware of this water cycle and it plays a major role, because whenever we are talking about understanding climate system, the three major cycles in which we are interested is energy cycle, water cycle, and carbon cycle. Now, recently, the water cycle and carbon cycle both are getting a lot of interest because there is a very close interactions between them. And when you are talking about close interactions between carbon cycle and water cycle, the biosphere, essentially the biosphere is playing a major role in the interactions between water and carbon cycle. So what we'll try to do today is that we'll focus mostly on the terrestrial connections between carbon cycle and water cycle. And when I am talking about terrestrial component, we are essentially interested in the vegetation component. So we are trying to understand what exactly is the role of vegetation, or in what way vegetation is playing a major role in terms of connecting the water cycle and the carbon cycle. Now, while looking at vegetation and also water cycle and carbon cycle, there is one of the things which we'd like to highlight, and I must highlight this, is the network view of climate systems. So this is one of the paper which essentially this paper has come as a demonstration of ecosystem. What should be the correct demonstration of ecosystem, and this was a very famous paper which was published in Science in 2012, where it was mentioned that when we are looking at ecosystem, which is true for climate system as well, there are components which are multiple components. They are all connected to each other through each other different through different links which are known as processes. Now normally what we do is that, depending on data availability, depending on our scientific understanding, what we do, we understand only very few of the links and we try to model them. So whenever we apply stress to the system, of course state starts deteriorating, and we normally see one after another the links are getting sort of destroyed. And what is happening is that we'll see step by step there is a uh, uh, failure of the system. So it doesn't really consider resistance to change. But if you look at climate system or terrestrial water budget or terrestrial biosphere, this system is strongly connected to each other. So there are nodes, there are links, and they are very strongly connected to each other. So whenever you apply stress, what it will do is that it will try to resist the change, and it will try to do a lot of local repairs, which is very important. And this actually gives us the idea that under climate stress or under any kind of stress, how does the ecosystem really work? So it was seen, I mean, one of our students, Sachin Budakati, who published a few paper long back, I think, not really long back, I think 5 years back, he published a paper in Water Resources Research where he has shown that, you know, here where he has shown that if you apply stress to an ecosystem, what happens is the ecosystem, the climate system or regional climate system and ecosystem together, they will start developing more links among themselves to resist the changes. And so it really happens. If you look at the data and if you do more analysis of the data in terms of under stress and non-stress period, you'll see that this kind of links are getting developed. So how do they develop? What exactly are the mechanism? Those are very difficult to answer. But data shows that yes, they do develop. But what happens when the stress or when the change goes beyond a certain limit, then the entire system fails. And sometimes we call it tipping point and so on and so forth. So, or we call it critical transition. So that sort of thing, that sort of network kind of a concept, which was brought first in ecosystem, and then now climate system is also considering it very seriously. We can see a lot of papers or a lot of publications which are coming in climate science and climate adaptation, where we are essentially using network theory to understand the system. And we are also talking about network resilience or climate resilience using network theory. This is also coming up in a big way. So there are a lot of works which are going on, but what I'd like to mention is that if you're looking at water system, or if you're looking at ecosystem, which is connecting carbon cycle and water cycle, we are essentially looking at through the lens of network. So we're trying to understand how the links are developed and so on. Now, if you are looking at it, so there is very nice figure in Bonan 2050. Bonan wrote a very nice book on ecological climatology. It's a fantastic book, and where what he tried to explain is that what exactly will be the impact of increased carbon dioxide concentration on vegetation and what will be its feedback. And this is something which is being mentioned, that feedback is very important when you are essentially talking about stress, because it will tell you that in what way the links are getting perturbed because of the perturbation in climate. So as we know that when carbon dioxide concentration is increasing, it results into increase in temperature, aridity and so on, and which has impact on terrestrial ecosystem. And there will be droughts, there will be heat stress, which will result into decrease in the land carbon sink or vegetation, because vegetation will undergo mortality, vegetation will have stress. And if that will happen, the carbon sink potential, that means absorbing the atmospheric carbon dioxide through vegetation, it will reduce. Remember, terrestrial vegetation, as per the present estimate, it takes around 30% of the emitted CO2, which is not significant, or just by if afforestation you cannot really solve global warming problem, but still it plays a major role in terms of capturing 30% of the emitted CO2 as per the IPCC estimates. And it shows that this further reduces when you have increased carbon dioxide. But at the same time, there is another kind of feedback. This feedback is a bit interesting. So what happens when there is increased carbon dioxide concentration? There is some method, something happens which is known as carbon dioxide fertilization. In carbon dioxide fertilization, the photosynthetic activities increases and water use efficiency increases. That means with smaller amount of water, or they reduce the transpiration and they produce more productivity. So productivity per unit use of water increases, and that results into increased vegetation, and that will increase again the land carbon sink. So which is good again in terms of capturing the CO2. So in one way, it is badly affecting, which is mostly radiation based. So we can consider the positive carbon climate feedback is more like radiation driven, where increased temperature, increased aridity, that results into decreased vegetation productivity and hence increased CO2. And the second one is better because it has carbon fertilization, it improves vegetation productivity, and that reduces carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. So there are two mechanisms which are happening, and if we are talking about changes, we are mostly interested in the resultant of both of them. Now, if you look at it, over the last 10 years, if you look at water cycle and carbon cycle, there are a series of papers which have come, and mostly they have come in nature science, nature climate change, nature communications, and so on. And here I am, I'm showing a series of 4 nature papers which started with 2017, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021. So almost consecutive 4 years, there are 4 papers which have come and which resulted into a lot of debates and so on and so forth. So the first paper was written by Jung et al. In 2017, where it was asked that, what essentially controls the land carbon dioxide sink. So the major drivers were considered was, one can be temperature and other one can be water shortage. So which one is exactly is the correct driver for such changes in the or variability of net ecosystem exchange. So it's essentially the flux exchange between the atmosphere and the land. And if you look at it, the first paper says, okay, it's mostly driven by local, and local temperature plays a major role in terms of controlling the net ecosystem exchange. So temperature was the main driver. Then if you look at it, there are 3 other nature papers that totally contradicts the first nature paper. And the first one came from a group of ETH Zurich. What they have said is that they said that if you plot total water storage that is coming from satellite grace and the carbon growth rate, and in the atmosphere, which removing the trend, then you will find that there is a very strong negative correlation that clearly shows that what they have said is that shows that total water storage is something which drives the net ecosystem exchange and hence the carbon growth rate. Then this group again collaborated with another group. They published another nature paper in 2019. What they have said is that, look, if you look at the now model projections and so on, you will see that both the trend and the variability of net biome productivity, that means how much photosynthetic activities are really happening minus respiration and so on. If you consider the net biome productivity, it is driven by both trends of soil moisture as well as it is also driven by variability of soil moisture. Then of this series, another paper came, which came in 2021 Nature, again by the ETH group. And what they have said is that they said, of course, after these nature papers, there are few papers which started saying, no, look, temperature is also important. And temperature drives the vapor pressure deficit. And vapor pressure deficit essentially drives the vegetation productivity. But so they came up with another paper, and what they said is that, okay, yeah, VPD may have impact, but VPD has to work through soil moisture. So VPD affects soil moisture and soil moisture affects. But one of the most important part what we have to understand is that none of them really use the proper causal approach or causal inference theory and so on, or causal discovery methods. So these were mostly based on correlation or partial correlation. And interestingly, all of them got some place in nature, which actually happened. But when I started, 3 of my students, they have started looking at it. One is Elizabeth Eldos, the second student's name is Nivedita Dubey, and third is Akash Verma. So 3 of my students have started looking at it, and we are not really very convinced with any of this nature paper because none of them really used any kind of causal approach. So that was one of the things we started thinking about it. So is it causality? Correlation is not causality. And even when we are talking about causality, we have to take care of, so let's see, if there are multiple variables, we have to take care of autocorrelation. We have to take care of common driver. So autocorrelation means if X impacts X, and then if you see that past of X is impacting Y, so then you can get some correlation and so on. The second one is there can be a common driver Z which affects both X and Y, and that will result into a correlation between X and Y. That doesn't mean that X really affects Y or Y really affects X. The third one is, so second one is common driver, or we sometimes call it confounding factors. The third one is indirect link, where essentially X affects Z and Z affects Y, but you will get a link, indirect link between X and Y. So there are multiple possibilities which are possible. So if you really need to understand the ecosystem or climate system through a network lens, then all of these things have to be resolved properly. And so if you're talking about causal discovery methods, there have been, this is one of the problem which has been there in not only in climate science, in everywhere for quite a long time. And randomized controlled trials has been done. So essentially there are experiments which are being performed, which are essentially picking up random samples and performing certain experimental physically and trying to understand what is happening. So randomized controlled trial has been there for a significant time. For example, this is one of the science paper which was written by the Nobel laureate in economics, Professor Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and so on, and that resulted the poor economics and so on. So we all know that thing. But the entire work started with randomized control trials, and of course there are but can we really perform this kind of study in climate? It's impossible. So the randomized control trial we cannot do. The second one is starting with observation causal discovery, and it started in 1969, where we are talking about granular causality approach, which has been used for quite significant time, which uses linear approaches and so on. And then very recently there were papers by Jacob Runge, who and they have and this group has been publishing a lot of paper on causal association. They have developed a method which is known as PCMCI, Peter Clark MCI method, where they performed a very detailed analysis. They have done a lot of conditional estimates, to find out if there are spurious links among. So first they check correlation. They performed a lot of conditional correlation among variables with the memories to find out the spuriousness, and then perform another set of tests with MCI approach, and finally picks up what are the links which are really, really robust. And one of the good thing happened is that, of course, they have made, as soon as they published the paper, they have made the code available. And as soon as the code were available, we have seen a huge number of climate applications really came out of this method. So there are significant number of applications which have come. But what are the assumptions? There are assumptions. Of course, any causal approach will have assumptions. So this one also has its own assumption. The first one is it uses the time order. So essentially past affects present, means past can be cause of present. Causal sufficiency, which is very important. That means we are essentially talking about a system. So let's say we are interested in some m number of variables. And we are making sure that other than these m variables, there is no other variables which affects the system through some mechanism. So that is known as causal sufficiency. That means all direct common drivers are really, really observed. And of course, it uses causal Markov chain conditions where some independence is being considered. So there are certain assumptions which are being used. And of course, any mathematical method has those assumptions. Now, if you are looking at some details of causal discovery approaches, so one is, of course, granular causality, which most of us know, which is based on the vector autoregression model, where we are trying to understand if past of X really helps to improve Y is present. If that is there, then we'll consider X grandeur causes Y. We'll not say exact causality, but we'll say X grandeur causes Y. Then there is a method which is called information theory. So information theory was another theory which was been extensively used in understanding the causal approaches. So essentially entropy means uncertainty associated with a variable. Maybe I'll try to explain entropy in a much simpler language. So let's say Adway is now organizing this workshop, and on the last day, most of you have to catch flight to come back to your hometown. And let us assume that some of you will have flight around 8 p.m. and some of you will have flight around in the 12 midnight. Now, for the 8 p.m., those who are catching a flight at 8 p.m., and if Advai tells you have to start at 5 p.m. from ICTS, otherwise you'll be in trouble because this is the office time, you'll get a lot of traffic. you will not give much importance to this information because you know already that during office time there will be a lot of traffic, so you'll leave early. But let's say on that specific day, on in the 12 midnight, if you have a flight, and Adway informs that some construction works are going on in Bengaluru on those specific roads, and there will be there are chances of significant delay on those roads. So you have to start early. This will be a very important information because you will think that during after 10 p.m. the roads will be almost free and we can easily reach within a very short time. But if you know that there is a huge traffic because of something else, then it will be a very useful information. Why? Because it has high surprise. That means it has very low probability. Such an incident has very low probability. So when we are talking about the probabilistic mean of surprise, we call it entropy, which is known as Shannon's entropy, which is based on information. How important are the information? Now, which is essentially a measure of uncertainty in terms of surprise. Now, when you are talking about mutual information, what we are trying to say is that how much reduction of uncertainty is possible with the knowledge of another variable. So this is known as mutual information. And then something is known as transfer entropy. So when you are talking about mutual information, you are essentially telling that with y, how much of x, with x, how much of y can be explained, or how much of uncertainty can be reduced. Now, if I will say that how much of past of x can explain present of y conditional on the past of y. That means it tells you that exactly this much of x information of past is actually affecting the present of y. And this is known as transfer entropy, which is essentially some causal approach which was suggested by the information theory specialist, and then it was extensively used in hydrology by Professor Kumar and others. And it also uses some statistical significance test. So what they do is that they use some random shuffled surrogates. So let me explain what does it mean by random shuffled surrogates. What it does is that, let's say if you have a sample, and what they do is that they mix the sample. So randomly, so there is a sequence of the sample, but you just randomly shuffle it, and then generate such 100 or 1,000 samples and get the transfer entropy value, and then find out the original sequence transfer entropy value, and then find out if the original sequence transfer entropy value you are getting, but with random things you are not getting. So if you get that, based on that you will get the statistical significance. And then this method, which is known as PCMCI, where we'll try to get fully conditional, and then we'll check the spuriousness, and finally we'll apply MCI to find out what are the robust links. So there are n number of methods, but these are some of the methods which got huge attention. So what we thought is that we'll go back to what we thought is that we'll go back to this problem, this specific problem which was by Humphrey et al. In 2018, and we're trying to find out what exactly is happening if you use causal approach, because as I said that none of those papers in Nature use the causal approaches. So when we did that, what we have found is very interesting. As soon as you're applying causal approaches, you're not getting any link from total water storage to carbon growth rate. Absolutely zero link. So, and then if you're using Granger causality or PCMCI, you are not really getting any link. But of course, what you are getting is that precipitation, any links, what we are getting is that consistently we are getting VPD to any link and VPD to CGN link, which is very interesting because that was the original paper in 2017 in Nature by Jung et al., where they have said, yes, it is driven by vapor pressure deficit, but after that, there are a lot of correlation-based approaches. What that's being said that they are not really happening. Remember, this is a global study. This is not a regional study. And there are huge number of papers. You can see that quite a significant paper things have been obtained. And what we are finding is that, yes, so there is not much of robust analysis. The other interesting part is that the Granger causality and PCMCI, they are also not matching. And of course, we'll take PCM, but even PCMCI here also using a linear method. So essentially, there are differences across even methods also. Even if you are getting some sort of a link from one method, that doesn't also mean it's robust, because there is a lot of uncertainty in those things. So causal discovery methods are still at a very immature stage. I'll tell you why. We'll show it, but before that, what I'd like to say is that we're then focusing on just the tropical region. If you're considering some part of tropical region, we have considered. And if you're using tropical condition, there we have found that in tropical forest, there is a link from total water storage to NE. But this is with Granger causality. But as soon as you are using PCMCI, again the link is not coming. So for certain cases, links are coming. For certain cases, links are not coming. And there is a huge uncertainty. So just if you use one causal approach and say, look, I have found this link to this link, that may not be always robust. I'll tell you why it is not always robust. We'll come back again to this problem, to the mathematical problem. But what I'd like to mention is that, yes, they are not coming. But then when we started looking into the GRACE data and also the carbon dioxide growth rate data, what we have found is that, GRACE and carbon dioxide growth rate, they have some similarities. But most important part is that, over the last few years, there has been a drop in, total water storage and carbon dioxide growth rate and so on. So what it shows that because of certain time period, you can see over only this period, this decade, there has been some good association. Probably that is getting reflected. And this is what we are saying, it may not be correct causality. So though it has been claimed always that total water storage is controlling everything or soil moisture is controlling everything, but a detailed statistical analysis does not really support this, which is happening only for total water storage to NE over tropical region, but for tropical forest, but only with Granger causality. Even with PCMCI, it's not showing such a result. So then we ask the questions. So we are not very convinced that any causal method is really doing well. So we ask the question, how reliable are these causal links really? And we published this paper very recently. It just got accepted in Physical Review Week, which is a bit mathematical paper. But what I'll try to do is that I'll try to explain it in a very simple language. So let's say if you have 4 variables, this was done by my student Elizabeth, who has just submitted her thesis and now doing a postdoc. So what is she doing is that she generated 4 independent random normal numbers x, y, z, w. There is absolutely no association. But when she applied PCMCI and mutual information, she started suddenly getting x to y and y to x links. We are surprised because we are not supposed to get this kind of links. So then we are confused, and then we started checking at which lag we are getting this specific link. And what we have found is that x to y we are getting at lag 1 and y to x we are getting at lag 4. Then what we did, we thought of doing some robustness check. So what we did is that we took this entire sample and we started dividing into some subsamples. There may be some overlap because you cannot have infinitely long samples from where we can get quite a significant number of subsamples. But what we did here is that we just divided it to few subsamples and perform transfer entropy on each of these subsamples and then perform statistical significance test. When we did that, what we have found is that among these subsamples, the number of occurrences of link actually tells you how robust are they, which is important. So when the link is robust, it should appear in most of the subsamples. If it is not, it will not appear. Then what we developed is that we developed some spuriousness index, which now in the last submitted version we name it as CAST index, which is very similar to spuriousness index, which is a measure of spuriousness. And what we said is that if more number of times it is appearing, that means the spuriousness index is less, and so on. So of course we have used logarithmic and developed some sort of thing. And there what we are finding is that it's actually most of the cases the spuriousness index is very high. So then what we did is that we have considered some synthetic data set. So what we did is that we have created another sample with X, Y, Z, D. Now there are associations, some associations are not there. And then when we applied this kind of spuriousness index, we are finding that when the spuriousness index is greater than 10%, then the links are not very robust. But when you are less than 10%, they are actually showing very good robust things. So there, and then we started using different methods, like we have used Lorentz method, Lorentz system, we have used it to Rossler system, we have used it to Heron system, and what we are finding is that this method has some capability of really picking up the robust linkage. Of course, sometimes it misses. I'll not say that it always picks up, because we have a very strong criteria of 10%. Many times it is actually also missing. But at least whenever it is picking up a link, that means that causal connection is really existing. So how to really convert it into a statistical significance and so on is difficult, and probably it needs more, active participation of mathematicians and computer scientists, but still something we have developed with this. And then what we did is that then we picked up one of the method which was developed by, which was applied to one of the local ecosystem in the US, and it was done by Professor Kumar of UIUC and others, and which was published in WRR as well as PNAS. So we picked up that data, and when we applied this sort of method, so still what we are finding is that even after doing a lot of robustness check, you know, we still getting precipitation to TWS is only the robust links. Otherwise, there are still mismatches. So that means most obvious things are only coming. The rest of the things are not really coming. So things are pretty complicated, and still we are really thinking that what can be a very robust causal approaches, because what we have found is that if you start comparing one with another, if you start checking with synthetic data set, none of the approaches which are there from causal inference methods are really robust. And then, okay, so these are the papers which I was talking, that there are 2 water resources research papers and 1 PNAS paper. And they have, of course, got these results, but they are not really working very well when you're applying a different robustness check. Now, when you are talking about, so I'll again go back to, vegetation productivity again. I know I have completed 35 minutes, so maybe I'll take, I think I can take 45 to 50 minutes. So I have another 15 minutes, so I'll try to utilize that with some more recent work. So, one of the paper which I'd like to highlight today is that in 2019, there was a very nice paper which came from remote sensing data by Chain et al., which came in Nature Sustainability, where it was said that, there has been some global greening which is happening in terms of increased LAI, and China and India are playing major role. India is the second highest contributor to global greening, first China and then Europe and US and so on and so forth. So, which is good. So we are doing something, and so what was being mentioned is that it can be because of carbon fertilization. So it was just hypothesized, not specifically mentioned. Now, if you're looking at IPCC assessment, so IPCC Year 6 assessments, if you look at it, what we are finding is, if you are considering everywhere, there is an increase of ecological drought, but over South Asia, we are not very sure, because there has been low agreement what exactly is happening over the South Asian region. But overall, globally, there has been increase. The other important part, what is being mentioned is that because of climate change, because of the climate change impacts for higher warming condition, even carbon fertilization will try to improve the vegetation productivity. But because of the direct radiation impact, the vegetation productivity will significantly affected. And because of that, you will see that the global carbon sink potential of ocean and land together, this will reduce. So you can see that if you go from SPI 1.9 to SPI 8.5, the global carbon sink potential is actually reducing. So this is something which IPCC is telling. Now let us try to understand what exactly is happening over India and some of the tropical regions. So now when we look at climate drivers in India, so now this is not about, again, trend or long-term things, but it is about observed data. So let's say if you pick up satellite observed data and try to find out what is happening, very similar to that Nature paper, but this is just done for all India. And if you look at for all India, what we are finding is that, precipitation is the driver for the primary productivity and also for net photosynthesis. So gross primary productivity or GPP means how much photosynthesis is happening. Gross primary productivity minus plant's respiration is net photosynthesis. So you can see that precipitation is actually controlling the gross primary productivity with one lag. And temperature and LI, they have a real-time connection. But we do not get direct link with total water storage and GPP. The reason could be, one of the reason is that, if you're talking about deep groundwater, probably they are not properly taken by the plants, because shallow root depth, they are taking only this, because India is primarily a lot of croplands are there, and the croplands have a completely different kind of mechanism. The first one is that it is just taking shallow root water. So whenever precipitation falls, it just recharges the shallow root soil moisture, and this moisture has been taken. The second one is that it has again a negative impact because a lot of irrigation happens. So that has negative impact of TWS on photosynthesis. So essentially with photosynthesis, so essentially when you are irrigating for improved vegetation, your water is depleting. So it is having negative correlation. So probably positive and negative is cancelling. So climate drivers in India is even more complicated because the human component is coming into picture in terms of irrigation. So that makes the system even more complicated. Now coming to the role of, so this one was published in ERL by one of our student Akash Verma, who is now at Imperial College doing his postdoc. And then the question comes, what are the role of carbon fertilization? So one of, I have shown the Bonan's figure as well. So what is happening is that one hypothesis is that there will be increased plant growth because of carbon dioxide fertilization. So leaf area index will increase. Now interesting part is that when the leaf area index will increase, when the vegetation will increase, so it will essentially take more water. Even though the water use efficiency is increasing, but it needs more water because it has more volume. And when it has more volume, the soil moisture should decrease. The second thing is that because its water use efficiency is increasing, because of the stomatal behavior, it will use less water. So soil moisture should increase. So there are two different mechanisms which are happening, and its resultant will tell what exactly will happen because of carbon fertilization. So what we tried to do is that we have picked up for future what will be the role of carbon fertilization. We have used LU-MIP output. So we have considered two cases. One is historical land only data. So essentially land historical data where we are considering changing carbon dioxide concentration. The second one is historical land only, but constant CO2. So, and we are trying to understand with the increased CO2, what exactly is happening to vegetation. And we have used some of these models where you have considered leaf area index, soil moisture, gross primary productivity, and transpiration. And as I said, that water use efficiency is gross primary productivity divided by transpiration. Now, when you looked at the carbon fertilization, what you are finding is that when you are increasing CO2, that means land historical, you'll see that increased gross primary productivity. That means vegetation is doing better photosynthesis. Of course, its leaf area index is increasing because of carbon fertilization. Water use efficiency is increasing. Interesting part is that transpiration is also increasing because we thought that transpiration should reduce. But why transpiration is increasing? Because its leaf area index has increased so much that even though they are try to preserve water, but total amount of vegetation is so much so that it will start increasing, or increase in vegetation is so much. And that results into almost similar kind of soil moisture, which was again interesting. But this is, and then if you look at in more details, so over the years, you can see that some of the variations of soil moisture are same. But interesting part is that historical thing with the increased CO2, you are getting slightly decreased soil moisture. These are essentially model simulations. Now, when we looked at arid region, because this is something which we are getting, over the arid region, we are finding that differences are there. In semi-arid or humid region, we are not getting, but over arid region, what we are finding is that the carbon fertilization or improved things is not really working very well, probably because of arid vegetation. And what we are finding is that, it results into little lower soil moisture, and which is a critical part. So what I'm trying to say here is that the soil moisture is getting reduced probably because of increased vegetation, and that results into a problem in terms of soil moisture. But at the same time, you are getting very high vegetation productivity. So may not be a real bad condition, but still there you are getting differences. Then we are interested in more in future projections where would like to use carbon fertilization in effect on vegetation productivity specifically for India. And this is done by my other student, Nivedita Dubey. So Nivedita is now doing postdoc at University of Washington at Pullman. So she did this work and she tried to understand that what are the impacts of carbon fertilization on the vegetation productivity. And she has considered multiple simulations which are available in SIMIP6. One is 1% increase in CO2 every year. The second one is uh, biogeochemistry. So what it does is that it considers the impact of carbon dioxide only being reflected in vegetation biogeochemistry. It will not affect radiation. The second one, it says that it will only affect radiation, but not the biogeochemistry. And then other one is pre-industrial control and 4 times abrupt increase in CO2. And of course, what she has found is that when you are 4 times abrupt CO2, that will increase the temperature quite significantly. And also LAI is also increasing. VPD, we're not very sure because it depends also on temperature. I mean, it also depends on how much rainfall is happening. So, normally models produce a increased rainfall when under warming condition over the Indian monsoon region, and that's what is happening. Transpiration also not very clear, but what are clear is that gross primary productivity is increasing and also water use efficiency is increasing. But soil moisture is again not showing not much of signal simply because the positive and negative impacts. So results remains almost similar, but as I said that carbon fertilization impacts on water use efficiency over India, it's very clear. But if you ask carbon use efficiency, that means gross primary productivity divided by net primary productivity divided by gross primary productivity, this is very uncertain. So how the carbon is being utilized and how much will be retained and how much will be released, this part is not very, very clear what exactly is happening. So models have a lot of uncertainty there. The other interesting part, what is being found is that even if you are considering standardized soil moisture and standardized GPP, you can see under dry condition, we are still getting higher GPP simply because carbon fertilization helps the vegetation to even work at a lower soil moisture. So this is something very interesting that tells us that, carbon fertilization really helps in improving the water use efficiency and that probably results into better vegetation productivity. But
Subimal,
yes.
5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 more minutes, I'll complete. Yeah, so these are some of the conclusions. Then what we try to understand is that what will be the relative role of soil moisture and vapor pressure deficit. And this is another major questions which have been addressed, and there are quite a number of nature communication paper in 2020, 2021 which are focusing on this. We started looking into it. In what way we looked into it? We tried to disentangle soil moisture and vapor pressure by pinning them into different things and try to understand under each bin of soil moisture what are the impacts of vapor pressure deficit, under each of bin of vapor pressure deficit what are the bin impacts of soil moisture. And what we have found is that over India soil moisture plays a major role because if we are talking about Indian region, it's mostly driven by the Indian monsoon and the crop that is dependent on Indian monsoon, because of which the soil moisture plays a major role over Indian region. And then what we try to do is that we take the vegetation productivity, regress it with soil moisture, take the residuals and find out how the residual is connected to VPT. In the same way we did it for soil moisture, and we tried to understand the individual impacts of soil moisture and VPT. And what we have found is that here also soil moisture is playing a major role on real time. So I'm talking about here on real time. We are not really talking about past. Now what we thought is that then Akash Verma picked up this topic, and what he wanted to do is that he wanted to understand, can we really look back the past and try to find out if the past, how the past of soil moisture and VPT is actually affecting. And what we have found, of course, this is not that important. The important part is this one. If you look at the impact of soil moisture memory, that means how by subtracting the mutual information from mutual information, we're subtracting transfer entropy. And what we have found is that, of course, soil moisture and vapor pressure deficit, both memory important. But what we have found is, which is very important, what we have found is that over the tropical region, the impact, the memory of VPD is actually playing a major role, because whenever there is a increase in VPD, it affects the stomata directly. And when stomata is getting affected, it has some persistence. So it will continue for quite some time, and that affects the vegetation. So what is happening is that, of course, atmospheric memory is quite less, but whenever VPD starts affecting vegetation, the vegetation retains that for quite some time, and that results into more prominence of vegetation, the vapor pressure deficit memory compared to soil moisture memory. So vapor pressure deficit memories are playing a significant role, mostly over the tropical region, and which is one of the major thing which may not be really agreeing with past data, past work, because past work they never considered memory in a proper way or causality in a proper way. So we are getting some results. So I'd like to end saying that it's very complicated. Getting a very definite conclusion is still difficult, and a lot of works are going on. And we hope that data, physics, and machine learning, all of them will work together and probably will come up with a better science in next few years. So thank you for your attention, and thanks for the opportunity. Thank you very much. I'll be very happy to answer a few questions. Yeah.
Yes, Subimal, thank you. Just let us see. Questions from, okay, yeah.
Very good. Good afternoon, sir. This is Rahul Kashyap from IIT Kharagpur. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Sir, firstly, like talking about CFE, that like it is the given like the weakening of the like in the warming scenario, it is expected that the radiation effects might counterbalance the fertilization effects. Also, there are like massive like drying scenarios and nutrition like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus limitations in the coming in the future scenarios. So, how do you see for a given like mostly moisture control system like India, how important is CFE in the future?
So if you look at the models, if you really if you look into the models, what it says is that CFP will result into increased water use efficiency. That means with the same amount of water, you will produce, the photosynthesis will be more. But at the same time, what is also happening is that your leaf area index is increasing. So when your leaf area index is increasing, there will be slight reduction in the soil moisture. So there will be a balancing mechanism. That being said, that one of the things what we also have to understand is that still now we are relying on vegetation models which are there in earth system models, and most of the vegetation models do not have a specific India specific parameterization. So that's another issue when you are using this kind of vegetation models. But till now, whatever climate model outputs are available, that tells us this. Now if you look at the observed data set, or in observed data set, it says, of course we cannot really quantify very well the carbon fertilization because we have shorter period. So on carbon fertilization, we cannot say anything, but we can still say that, okay, at real time, soil moisture is playing a major role. But slightly longer term, what is happening is that vapor pressure deficit affects vegetation, and that vegetation retains that. So vapor pressure deficit memory also plays some role on the vegetation productivity.
Thank you, sir. So also second question is like SMVPD, like coupling is also very strong for the Indian region. So
Yes,
how to like distangle, and there will be like certain regions where say like VPD might be driving SM, and there will be certain regions where it will be vice versa, SM driving VPD. So that
yes.
distangling part, like could you like provide more insights on that?
Yeah. So what we tried to do is that that's a very good question, because this is something which is a major science question as well. Which one is more important? So essentially, it's a system: soil moisture, VPD, and vegetation. This is a system, and all are essentially integrated part of the system. Now let us try to understand how did we perform this. What we did is we first take the GPP, we regress it with VPD. Okay. Now find out the residuals. That means residuals tells us this is the component of GPP which cannot be explained by VPD variability. And we try to find out how much is it related to soil moisture. In the same way, we did it with the soil moisture and then VPD. So in that way, we try to disentangle and try to say that what are the individual impacts. But it may not be fully robust, as I said, that exact causal things and taking care of confounding factors and exact disentangling is next to impossible. But to certain extent, it's possible through this kind of approaches. That's what my comment.
Thank you, sir, for the answers.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. I am Dipan Chakraborty from IIT Kharagpur. So I have two questions regarding the causality. The first one is, can you please, actually I know about PCMCI, but I actually studied about Peter Clark algorithm, but I don't know anything about MCI algorithm. So can you please, explain in a short that what is MCI algorithm? That is my first question. And my second question is, there is a research that you have done. How reliable is the causal methods are? So regarding this, how good is the non-linear Granger causality methods?
Okay. So maybe I'll first explain the second question and then I'll go to the first question. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the second question is that, when you're talking about Granger causality, it doesn't matter if it is a nonlinear method or a linear method. Okay. So Granger causality means, let's say you are trying to predict y, and we are trying to find out how can we improve the prediction of y with the past of x, right? And being it a linear method, non-linear method, whatever method is that, if you get improvement in prediction of y with the past of x, then we'll say that x Granger causes y. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, but in that study, did you apply non-linear Granger causality?
Sorry.
In that study by
Hmm.
Elizabeth et al.,
Hmm.
did you use non-linear Granger causality or neural?
No, we have used linear Granger causality, but we have used nonlinear PCMCI as well as nonlinear mutual inform. I mean, mutual information is anyway nonlinear.
Okay. I got it.
Now the first question, you are talking about MCI. So MCI method, in a very simple language, what it does is that after PC it gets some network. Okay. Now what it will try to do, they want to further tune it, right? When it wants to further tune it, so it tries to check the conditional independence. So essentially, it tries to remove influence of, let's say, x, and there
Boundaries.
are n other variables and there is y. So it will try to make it conditional on other n predictors and try to find out what exactly is the influence of x on y. This is what, in a very simple language, is MCI. And exactly the same thing is being done in transfer entropy, but at a lower dimension, because at higher dimension it fails. And PCMCI is being claimed it will work at higher dimension. But still, if you do the robustness check, you will find that any method fails, unfortunately.
Okay, sir. So is it type of removing the confounding effect, MCI?
Yes, that's the purpose. That is the major purpose.
Okay, sir. I got it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, any other questions? Okay, so if no other questions is there currently, let's thank the speaker and we will continue with Professor Subimal's second part of his talk after lunch. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Adway. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. See you soon again.
See you.